So now what you've done is effectively replaced fathers with the state. And no-fault divorce accelerated that.
Coming up is an interview with Rachel Wilson, author of the book Occult Feminism, A Secret History of Women's Liberation, which analyzes the overall effects of feminism as a movement, whether it has delivered on the promise of making society a better place for women, and whether women are generally happier as a result.
And everything is set up for both parents to work and for children to be in daycare and then public school all day. And I kind of started asking myself, like, why is that?
What effect do you think it has on men? Like, are men becoming more, is it everyone's becoming more feminine due to the feminist narrative?
Oh, it's definitely had a huge impact on how men behave. There's all the feminist conditioning, right? A lot of young men are raised with no dad. They have a female authority figure in the home. They go to daycare and there's a female authority figure there. They go to a public school where 85% of elementary teachers are women, so they have a female authority figure there. They go to university, which is specifically catered towards women and women's success. And, you know, well, my name's Rachel Wilson. I am an author and researcher. I have a book I wrote called Occult Feminism, The Secret History of Women's Liberation, which dives into the origins of the feminist movement and a lot of the religious and philosophical underpinnings in feminism that a lot of people may not know about. It also goes into funding of the feminist movement, how it was kind of hijacked by the CIA and disseminated through the culture via their, you know, culture wars, the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom, and then also goes over some of the impacts of a century of feminism and kind of evaluates like where we are now after a century of this and whether or not you know, it really benefited women the way it promised to. So that's me. I do have a YouTube channel and a Substack with lots more writing and research on it as well. I'm also a homeschooling mom of 5 and a wife. So that's a big part of my life. This is kind of my side gig that I do. So thanks for having me.
What I really thought was interesting about your interview with Pearl was that it sort of felt like I could feel some kind of pieces moving into place that were explaining a lot of the things that are going on now. And I feel like a lot of people kind of have this intuition that things are not, that there's a way things kind of should be that would work really well for society. And then there's a way that things are now. And it's like, we know new things are happening and they sound like they should be good. The packaging looks good, but it's not really quite that good in reality, the practical effects of that. What I mean to ask is it safe to say that basically your book is sort of revealing how a lot of the issues we're seeing today are kind of stemming from the ideology behind feminism?
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of people, when they hear feminism, like your average person on the street, you know, they're like, yeah, you know, feminist. I'm not really feminist. I guess women's live is good. I mean, we shouldn't enslave the women, right? I mean, sounds good. Or maybe they might give it a little bit of an eye roll and be like, oh, feminists, you know. But they don't probably really understand the history of it. And there's a good reason for that, actually. It's not kind of by accident, and it's not even really because people don't care. It is because in the 1970s, when they started the women's studies departments, which were specifically created by the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation to disseminate feminist propaganda through the university system, they literally changed the history. Not an exaggeration. They actually rewrote it. There's a wonderful professor named Joseph Miller who wrote a big academic piece about this. He studied the top 13 textbooks from like the Victorian period to now in women's history and found that they had literally written out large portions of the history on purpose. And the reason they gave for doing this is something called standpoint theory. This was developed by Sandra Harding, who was a feminist kind of radical in the 60s and 70s. And she came from this Marxist tradition that saw, you know, so-called objective truth as problematic. And so she said, we really either have to radically redefine truth or get rid of it altogether. And so what we're going to do is rewrite history from the standpoint of the oppressed woman, right? So for the purposes of women's studies, we're going to now retell the historical timeline from the supposed, viewpoint of the oppressed person. Now, of course, there's a lot of problems with that because, right, depending on which group you ask, they might have a different idea of who's the most oppressed. And that's where this modern kind of oppression Olympics comes from, is this idea of standpoint theory. Standpoint theory has also been used quite notably to hijack science, like the hard science fields as well. And there's a lot of stuff you can find on that. I'm certainly not the only person making that critique. James Lindsay talks about that a lot. But what I'm trying to say is there were ideological, religious, and philosophical ideologies that feminism was born from that you wouldn't necessarily want to advertise to the American public at large because it would be somewhat frowned upon. So those things would be different occult religions, Eastern mysticism, Gnosticism, theosophy, just to name a few. Also Luciferianism. A lot of people might not know that the 19th century suffragettes openly named Lucifer as their symbol of women's liberation. So in the mostly Christian West, especially, from the 1800s up through, I'd say, the 70s, you wouldn't necessarily want to advertise that most of the suffragettes were spirit mediums or tarot card readers or automatic writers who sat around seance tables and belonged to like Aleister Crowley circles. Okay. So they didn't want to talk about that. And then it's also very distinctly Marxist. It comes very much out of the Marxist socialist tradition as well. And you see a lot of that in academia. So they wrote out that. And then they also wrote out the fact that there was a much, much larger anti-suffrage movement than there was a pro-suffrage movement that had far higher membership among women than the pro-suffrage movement did. So to the best of our knowledge, only about 4% of women in America and maybe 5 to 6% of women in England wanted suffrage up until the time that it passed, which kind of blows people's minds when I tell them that.
Let me unpack that a little bit. So the standpoint theory is basically saying something like it's okay to ignore objective reality because the consequences of paying attention, or let's say prioritizing objective reality, is that we have oppressed people. So to reverse that and make things more fair and better for the oppressed, we should start considering things in terms of the standpoint of the oppressed. So yes. It to a degree, it actually acknowledges that it is objectively incorrect or different from the objective reality, but they say that, but it's good. It'll be for the greater good if we ignore objective reality. So is that an unfair characterization?
No, that's a pretty good characteristic. It blatantly states that the idea of objective truth itself is problematic, and that really there are multiple ways of knowing that are very subjective. And this comes out of kind of that postmodern tradition that was very popular in the mid-20th century.
Sorry, there was a term you used. Different ways of knowing. So this is, what does that mean?
So according to standpoint theory, from a postmodern Marxist dialectical kind of view of the world, these people are saying, well, we have all these history books and we have all these science textbooks that supposedly tell us the truth, and we're supposed to teach this to our students. But whose truth is it, right? It's white men with power writing these books, and who says that their version's the only version of what's true or the only kind of knowledge you can have? So it's a bit ironic because when we go back to the roots of where feminism comes from, it comes directly out of the Age of Reason, when we kind of switched over from having a pre-scientific worldview and the philosophy shifted in favor of empiricism and a scientific methodology as the way of knowing things about the natural world. oddly, by the time we get to the mid 20th century, those same kind of people, the Marxists of that age who wanted this scientific almost technocracy and envisioned this utopian future with, you know, total radical egalitarianism, no hierarchy, no authority, right? We reject all authority and hierarchy. We don't like the church anymore. We don't like the king anymore. We want this radical egalitarian future utopia. Out of that comes this complete and total rejection of objectivity or what science is, how science should be done at all. And the reason that I think they kind of flipped that on its head a little bit is because it is definitely an inversion of the natural order we had up until this point. And there were, throughout this movement, over 200 years, a lot of wealthy elites who wanted to be able to kind of mold and twist the narrative depending on what kind of social engineering they wanted to do. So that's why I think standpoint theory, it was just one of many theories, but it was kind of plucked out and promoted at certain universities. For example, Nelson Rockefeller created an experimental social science university in New York in the 70s that only lasted a few years before even the state of New York said, this is too crazy, we're going to defund it. That's where Harding came from and developed standpoint theory, and they really liked it. So they moved her over to University of Chicago, I believe, with a few other radical feminists of the time, which is a Rockefeller created and funded university. And they promoted these things, and then it kind of spreads through the academic world, because these are the entities that give people professorships, they give them study grants, things like that. So it's a very easy way to steer where they want the academia to go. So standpoint theory, I think, was just very useful to people who wanted to reorganize society in their image and wanted a very flexible, moldable way of redefining what the truth is, if that makes sense.
Okay, and so just to clarify, this standpoint theory would you say it's like a component of feminism, or it was more like a tool to disseminate feminist ideas, feminist ideology, or let's say the ideology behind feminism? I don't mean to say feminine ideology.
Right. Yes. No, it was definitely came directly out of feminism. It was standpoint feminist theory. It was later in the 80s and 90s expanded to other areas of social science, mostly social justice kind of work, you know, things in psychology, sociology. But like I said, even the natural sciences have been very much impacted by standpoint theory, because it kind of radically redefined things like anthropology or archaeology, where there's no such thing as raw data. It always has to be interpreted in some way, shape, or form. Every text you read has to have some level of interpretation. There's no real such thing as just a text that says what it means and means what it says, right? That's why we have literature classes where we disseminate what the texts mean. So standpoint theory was just a very useful and flexible thing that came directly from feminism. And it was to justify the feminist movement of the 70s, which became incredibly radical. You saw eco-terrorist feminists, you saw radical lesbian separatist feminists, you saw gender abolition start to become a thing. So they needed some kind to make this work in academia at a time when it's being challenged by people who are working in the hard sciences, and they're questioning the epistemology these people are using. They really come right out and say, we developed our own epistemology, and it was standpoint theory is the one that they chose. And it's received lots of criticism, but it has continued to be the primary way that things are done in the university systems, even up until now.
Okay, so let's jump forward a little bit, because as we're talking now, it's almost like, you know, okay, feminism was spread throughout academia. Like, so why is that a bad thing? Like, people should know about feminism. Why are we talking like as if that's some sort of like hidden thing that was happening and it was bad? It just sounds like, well, get more rights for women, get them the right to vote, give them equal opportunity in the workplace. If we're to jump forward a little bit, what are necessarily the negative outcomes from feminism that we should be.
Yeah, sure. That kind of really gets to the heart of why I wrote the book and why I titled it Occult Feminism. There's actually a kind of a double meaning to the title. One is that what I just said, which is a lot of these early feminists were various occultic religious followers. You know, they were theosophists, they were Gnostics, they were Luciferians. And then as we get into the 20th century, we see a lot of goddess worship, earth worship, Wicca, and all of that kind of stuff sneaking back in. So when people, and the other thing is the word occult means hidden. So I'm saying these people were largely influenced by the occult, and there's also a hidden history of women's liberation that you're not told. So if we do a man on the street and we ask the average person, what do you think life was like prior to women getting the vote? You know, pre-1920, what was life like? And the average person will have a general idea that it was slavish, it was oppressive, that women couldn't do hardly anything. You know, they were just chained to a stove and forced to give birth and couldn't go to college. I'll even hear people say, oh, they couldn't read, they couldn't have a job, you know. None of that is true. And I do take a few chapters to give people some information that would be very surprising as to just how much freedom women had. That's contrary to the narrative that you often hear. But really what I'm trying to do is show that this was not just a grassroots movement that just popped up out of nowhere all of a sudden, right? You might ask yourself, why did it take until the late 1800s for feminism to become this dominant force in the culture? Why did we have thousands of years of human history and that never happened until then, right? Well, there's a few reasons. And it's mostly because feminism was an agenda that was created and pushed by a handful of very wealthy elite people who specifically wanted to re-engineer society. And that's why the history part is important, because we're coming out of the revolutionary age. We have the French Revolution and the American Revolution. We have kind of monarchy going away and democracy coming to the forefront. And along with that, the reason those things happened is because of these ideas of egalitarianism, human rights, equality among men, all people are created equal, that kind of thing. Well, naturally, of course, out of that, you're going to have the question of, well, what about women? And then later, I think we're going to talk a little about, well, what about animals, right? Should we extend rights to animals? And why would we do that? And how are these things connected? So the ideas did not just spring up out of nowhere. They came from, although they claim to be socialist, they claim to be humanist, you know, they claim to have these altruistic ideologies behind them. You will find, if you do the research, that all of them were funded by wealthy elites, wealthy bankers, wealthy industrialists, powerful, very extremely powerful and influential men in most cases. And I thought, that's really interesting. I thought this was supposed to be a by women, for women kind of movement. You know, the women looked around one day and they said, oh no, we're oppressed. We should march until we can vote and until we can be in the workforce. Well, that's not what happened either. So if you go back and read something called The History of Women's Suffrage, written by Susan B. Anthony, it's huge. It's like a 4-volume tome, which probably no one except somebody getting a women's studies degree is ever going to bother to go through, unless you're me. And she said herself, right in the first chapter, that women did not want to be liberated. Women did not want suffrage. And, you know, the first thing that comes to most people's mind is, well, it's because they were so used to slavery. Probably the idea of liberation was scary to them, or they'd been conditioned to like their servitude, right? Well, Susan B. Anthony said, no, that's not the reason. She said, maybe, but more than that, it's that women enjoy a lot of privilege and protection that was granted to them under male suffrage and from the patriarchy, where they have a lot of, you know, protections that they would lose. They have a lot of comforts in their life that they would lose, and that they already kind of had everything they wanted. She said they're, you know, 90% of women in New England could already read by 1750. I mean, women were in large part more educated and more literate than men were in the 1700s and in the 1800s. And they continue to dominate the education system now. More women graduate college now than men, and more women have always graduated high school in the United States than men since we started keeping track. So this goes to your question of, well, what's bad about it? Wasn't it all good? Well, the thing about it, and the anti-suffragists knew this. There's a reason why so many women were part of anti-suffrage movements and wrote pamphlets and did their own demonstrations and wrote their own political tracts as to why they thought suffrage and supposed liberation. They asked the essential question, which is liberation from what exactly? And it turns out that the promises of feminism, which were, we're going to liberate you from the bad men, men are cheaters and beaters. They have too much power. And because they have this monopoly on force, they're abusive. And so if we liberate women, life will be safer for women. It will be safer for children. We'll have a more peaceful world. All the violence and oppression, it's the men doing that. And so if we just take away some power from the men, make it equal with the women, that will all go away and life will be better for everyone. The problem is we now have over 100 years of data we can look at to assess whether that's actually the case. And myself as a woman, I thought, well, if this movement is supposed to be for me, I want to take a look at that because I'm a mother of 5 children. And when I had my kids, I couldn't imagine. I thought I always was going to have a career. And when I had my first daughter, I didn't really care about that anymore. I wanted to be with her. And I looked at the society around me and I thought, there's no support for women to stay home with their children. And everything is set up for both parents to work and for children to be in daycare and then public school all day. And I kind of started asking myself, like, why is that?
Specifically, like, what do you mean by things are set up such that it is incentivized for both partners to have a career, for the husband and wife?
Right. So, I mean, if you ask most people now, if you ask a mother, why do you work? Most people will say, well, we kind of have to. It's really tough in today's economy to make it on one income and support children on top of that. With the cost of everything and the wages and taxes and all these multiple economic factors, we now have an individual wage instead of a family wage. We used to have more of a family wage because women were not in the workforce and it was primarily the men who were breadwinners and providers, and the women stayed home and took care of the home and raised the children. Well, that's not how things are set up anymore. And there's a reason for this. So if you want to know why, the reason is that the people who funded suffrage, specifically, I have a whole chapter on this in my book, the biggest benefactor of suffrage was a woman named Alva Vanderbilt Belmont. Yes, she's got a lot of last names because she married a Vanderbilt first, the grandson of Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was one of the wealthiest industrialists of the Golden Age. And she was one of the first women to be granted a divorce and a huge divorce settlement that made her one of the most wealthy women in the world. After that divorce, she married her ex-husband's best friend, Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont, and he died. And so she got all of his fortune as well and became this incredibly wealthy woman. And she liked the idea of women's suffrage, and she contributed lots of her fortune to it. She bailed out suffragettes who ended up in jail for doing terrorist activities. She bought their headquarters. She paid for their gatherings. She basically funded in large part the whole movement. And the people backing this, the other wealthy industrialists and politicians who backed it, thought this would be great because this is happening in 1919, 1920. And in 1913, these same people who were in Belmont circles were the same people who went to the Jekyll Island Club and created the income tax and the Federal Reserve System. So the federal income tax was snuck in along with the Federal Reserve System in 1913, kind of in a sneaky way under everyone's nose over a Christmas holiday. And for these people, wow, I mean, it's like a triple windfall they would get if they could convince women to get out of the home and into the workforce. Because number one, you double your tax base overnight. You don't just have one income to tax, you've got two. So this is going to expand the treasury like crazy. It's also going to expand the GDP like crazy and drive down wages and give these industrialists with factories expanding all over the country and all over Europe a huge pool of cheap labor, right?
So real quick, so you're saying that you basically double the workforce, right? And so then you're saying that that reduces the wage because simply you have so much more supply, right?
Yes, exactly. For example, in 1930s Germany, they did pass a few laws restricting women's work again because they were having an epidemic of joblessness, homelessness, and even self-deletion among the men of Germany because they were having a hard time finding work or supporting a family. And then the third benefit of this is if both parents are working all day, the kids have to go somewhere. So we had also just created the compulsory public school system and things like kindergartens, daycares, which were also called creches.
Sorry, what, do you know the specific date that the school system popped up?
It went by state, so it varies a little bit. It started in New England and then it kind of spread throughout the country. So from about 1890 to about the 1920s, right in the same time period, right around the Victorian era. And it happened here in the United States and also in Europe kind of at the same time. And again, this is because the system was created by academics who came out of Leipzig, Germany, and Munich, the universities there, and then they brought it over to the university system here in the United States, and it kind of was disseminated that way. So now the state also has a place to basically indoctrinate the kids all day while the parents are at work. And so you could say maybe patriotism and like work ethic and things where they were trying to instill, but really it was kind of more we need good soldiers and we need good workers and we need people who will follow orders and instructions. And it kind of takes the passing of culture away from the parents and puts it in the hands of the state. So if you were a wealthy politician, oligarch, at this time, I mean, women's liberation was kind of like a giant gift plopped in your lap to have almost total social control at this point. And then later we see things like the sexual liberation movement, which actually kind of started in the roaring 20s. It got put on pause during World War II, and then it kicked back up in the 60s. After that, we have no-fault divorce. These are all little revolutions coming out of feminism that greatly changed society. In fact, feminism, I would say, is bigger in some ways than the Industrial Revolution in its impact on the world that we live in. It's completely changed the entire social order in about 100 years, which is really remarkable.
Let me reframe some of what you said real quick. I'm going to try and kind of avoid any. So you were saying, for example, the school system allowed for indoctrination. Let's just assume that the school system is 100% perfect and everything that they teach is fantastic. But it doesn't change the fact that by encouraging women to adopt this idea that being in the workforce is, let's say, more empowering, it will put more women in the workforce. That means less time with the kids. That means more necessity for compulsory education, right?
Yes. So then you see the development of the Department of Education, which has to be funded by taxpayer money and these sort of things. Yeah.
I see. And then one of the other repercussions is that by doubling the workforce, as we already established, it's going to lower the wage due to, increased supply of labor. Right. Okay. And so those are two pretty big ways we could say that it changed society. But go ahead. What are some other ways that you would say that feminism or feminist concepts have changed society?
Well, some people have this impression that the breakdown of the family unit and marriage as an institution were like an unintended consequence. But that's also something that if you actually read the writings of early feminists, it was not unintentional at all. In fact, it was baked right into the cake on purpose. There was a Russian Bolshevik woman named Alexandra Kollontai she's kind of been almost forgotten from history, but was extremely impactful around this time. She was one of the first female heads of state in Russia. She was a foreign diplomat all the way up through the 50s. And she had correspondence with feminists in Spain, England, Germany, the United States. She came to the United States, Mexico, traveled the world. She had a lot of influence. And she and a lot of the other prominent suffragettes you've probably heard of, like Emmeline Pankhurst or Susan B. Anthony or Elizabeth Cady Stanton, all of them in their writings talk about wanting to dissolve the institution of marriage, or at the very least, completely redefine it. And the reason for that is because they were all socialist, communist leaning. So feminism really comes out of this like Marxist socialist desire for utopia, as I was saying. And they thought that, if we want to do that, we have to kind of get rid of private property and things like that. So, and have everything be administered by the state. Well, men are the private property owners. Men are the ones, everything's passed down through the paternal lineage, right? Men work and accumulate resources to pass down to their children. Well, we've got to disincentivize that. We can't have that. We want those things going to the state. We want those assets and resources controlled by the state and then redistributed fairly. So one of the big ways we do that is we get rid of marriage and we get rid of paternity. So they had a lot of really radical ideas all the way back to the early 1800s of making it so that people could not establish the paternity of their children and raising children communally, or having polyamory or free love or things like this. People think that came out of the 60s, but it's actually much older.
Why wouldn't abolishing marriage, or not abolishing it, but why wouldn't dissolving marriage just kind of accumulate more property in, let's say, the hands of women?
Well, here's the reason. So if you look at the out-of-wedlock births in, I believe, 1960, it was 4%. By 2010, that number goes up to 41% in the United States, but it's pretty consistent all across the West. So we more than 10 times, like 10 and a half times as many children being born to unwed mothers. As we see that number rise, if you put it on a graph and see it go this way, and then you do the same thing with welfare spending. Now, remember, the welfare state also created right around the same time as women's suffrage gets passed. We see welfare spending go from, I want to say, 50 billion a year in 1960 all the way up to 700 billion a year. And this is adjusted for inflation. This is not like raw numbers. So we see that number go up about 14 times over the same period. So out of wedlock births and welfare spending, if you plot them on a graph, they go up in perfect lockstep, totally parallel with one another. So now what you've done is effectively replaced fathers with the state. And no-fault divorce accelerated that by incentivizing women financially in a lot of ways to divorce. And then, fathers end up with no custody often and things like that. So it works in a couple ways. One is to disincentivize men to be gathering resources for themselves. They'll still work because they have to, but they're not going to try to accumulate land or maybe build businesses the way they would if they had a family to support and things like that. And then women are much more likely to vote for welfare spending, security. You could never have things like the national security apparatus that we have today. You couldn't have, open borders and immigration being the way it is. These are all very liberal things that are very appealing to women because women are much more prone to favor safety and security over risk, right? Whereas men are more willing to take a risk if they see a good benefit. So again, for politicians who want to expand the power of the state and the treasury infinitely, you want as many women voting as possible. And beginning in the 80s, women became the main voting bloc. More women vote now than men do.
Let me see. So you're saying that the welfare state incentivizes single parenthood?
Yes, because in a lot of cases, you'll see a woman gets a divorce, she'll get alimony and or child support. And then also she'll qualify for state assistance, things like the WIC program, food stamps, government housing. Women have all kinds of education grants to start businesses that men don't qualify for. So for a woman to leave and take the children with her, she not only gets all of those benefits from the government, but she half the time or more will remarry. And so she'll be getting income from the new husband while she's still getting income from the old husband, and she's also probably getting some state benefits as well. So there is quite a lot of financial incentive for women to divorce.
And so would you say it's fair to say that women are literally paid to not have a man in the house? They're paid by the government to not have a man in the house?
Yeah, I think it's tricky to phrase it exactly that way, because depending on your income and your situation, there's times where that may not be the case. But we certainly see it, especially in like the probably the lower half of incomes in the United States, and then in that upper stratosphere. So women tend to be rewarded more for divorce if they're middle class or lower, or if they're upper class. It's not, there's not as much incentive for people in that like 100 to 250,000 income range. They still usually get a pretty good deal, but it's definitely more on either end where you see the most benefit. But yeah, there's a lot of financial incentive. And then we could talk about how there's just an avalanche of cultural propaganda telling women that family holds them back. Children and motherhood just hold them back. Men are keeping them down, right? So I know me growing up, I was born in 1980. I heard this message just pounded into my head all the time growing up.
Okay, right before we get into that, I just want to clarify one other thing. So you were saying that basically men are disincentivized from accumulating resources because it's, for example, it's very easy to get divorced. So that means men no longer have the security or confidence that the resources that they accumulate will go down their lineage.
Yes. Statistically, marriage and family is an extremely risky endeavor for a man. So if you're a wealthy, very productive man, and you are, you're a guy who takes care of your finances, and you look at financial risk and you look at risk in business, and so you're oriented to look at like the return on investment of things. If you were to take a look at marriage statistically, it's a risk you would never take in any other area of life. You would never take a risk in business that there's a 2% chance or something that your partner might leave and take half the business and also your children, and you might have to pay him for the next 20 years. You would never take a deal like that. And a marriage contract, since no fault divorce in most places, it's honestly easier to get out of than like a cell phone contract is. A lot of marriages you can get dissolved in about 3 months for about $700. It's very easy to do. It's very quick to do. That's why we see such high rates of it.
Do you have some numbers on the top of your head, like what percentage marriages end by divorce? Are they initiated by the man or the woman? How often is it the case that the man, gives a good portion, let's say up to half of his assets to her, things like that?
Yeah. In most states, if you're in a no-fault divorce state, it's going to be usually a 50-50 split of assets, but typically it's the men who are holding more assets in their name, and the women are granted custody about 80 to 90% of the time. It depends on where you are. Men are getting more custody now than they used to, which I think is good news, but it still tends to default in favor of the woman. And I do have a recent article on my Substack that goes over why that is, and has a ton of data on it as well on this. But yeah, so 70 to 80% of divorces are initiated by the woman. Among college-educated women, that number goes up to 90%. So if you're a man married to a college-educated woman, if you get divorced, it's 90% chance she's going to be the one who does the divorcing and not you. And then most men do end up paying child support. And even in cases where women are ordered to pay support, they almost never do it. Like the rate of women who actually pay the child support they're ordered to pay is abysmally low. I want to say it's like 14% or something. But most of the time, it's the men who are ordered to pay, and the courts tend to lean towards the mother for a lot of reasons that you could debate whether that's fair or not. But there's definitely no doubt that it's risky for men. About half of marriages overall fail. That statistic is a little misleading, though, because first-time marriages among Christian couples is much lower. I think that one's like about 15 to 20%. If you're on your second or subsequent marriage after that, your second, third, fourth, the rate of failure of the marriage goes up with each subsequent marriage. So by the time you're on your third marriage, it's got like a 20% chance of lasting or something like that.
So, okay, so it doesn't sound like marriage is something that you necessarily get better at with more experience. You have
No,
more
definitely
tries.
not. It
Okay.
tends to be worse the more times you've been married.
Okay. And so before we get into the ways that culture is pushing this narrative onto women of you're being held back by getting a family, if you have a baby, there's something disempowering about that. So you said this thing about more educated women initiating more divorces. Is that something like, from your opinion, is that something like men can't handle an educated woman, or is it something more like they are learning ideas in academia that make them think less of their marriage, or make them think differently about the dynamic in a marriage?
It's a couple of reasons, and the first reason is actually pretty interesting. I looked into some of the data on this, and you might have heard the term hypergamy with the like red pill crowd getting popular these days. A lot of people have now heard this term. The idea that women want to marry up, right? That if a woman is successful and making a lot of money, she's generally not trying to marry a man who is less successful or makes less money. So we're seeing marriage rates actually fall kind of off a cliff in the last 10 or 20 years. And one of the reasons for that is that 65% of college graduates are now women. Women are making more money than they historically have, and they are dominating a lot of the growing career fields like healthcare, customer service, data and technology kind of stuff that's more female friendly. So they're making better money. And so they're finding it harder and harder as men graduate less from college, and as men are making less money, and as men are struggling more in the job market because we've outsourced all the factory work and this was a big deal with the 2016 election, right? Bring back the manufacturing jobs, these good paying jobs that men traditionally held. So women are complaining actually that they can't find a man they want to be with or stay with because they end up surpassing him in income. So that's one reason. The other reason definitely is that if you've been university educated, you're definitely going to be exposed to all the concepts that we've been talking about, this Marxist feminist angle, standpoint theory. And a woman who's in a university and earning a degree is already going to, you don't invest 4 years in college and all the money it takes to go to college, and then several years building a career for yourself to just give that all up to, stay home and raise kids. And this becomes an issue. People get married because they're in love. And a few years down the road, the man may want kids, and maybe the woman decides she doesn't, or they do have kids and she feels like her career is held back by the children. And these are some really commonly given reasons for why women divorce.
Interesting. Okay, so you introduce a kind of balancing act. It's like I have this sunk cost, or I have this investment in my academics, my career, whatnot. Yeah. So naturally, I'm going to have some partialness towards this, but then I also have children. So now, which one do I want to focus more on? One is going to suffer at the hands of the other. Yes. And so that's really interesting. Do you think it's fair to say, and I wonder if there are some studies on this, because this is just kind of my impression, but it seems like generally men are totally comfortable. Maybe some men prefer it. Maybe men don't really care. They could go either way, but they're totally comfortable dating and marrying a woman who is less educated than them, makes less money, has less, let's say, status. But women, they don't like that. So you have now introduced this dynamic where you have raised the bar to where you have made it such that so many men now don't meet women's qualifications because they are now less educated, making less money than them. So you have totally shifted a dynamic where you have all the money-making people willing to marry theoretically anyone, really, any woman. But now you have increased a bunch of income earners. You have a lot more income earners who are not willing to marry a certain subset of men. So what is the result of that kind of imbalance?
Well, it's pretty catastrophic. We heard a lot about overpopulation for a long time because of Thomas Malthus, and then later because of Paul Ehrlich in his book, The Population Bomb, which came out in the 70s. And a lot of climate hysteria about, we're overpopulated, there's too many people, and people are bad for the planet, so we need less people, right? You had China doing their one child policy. You had things like Planned Parenthood and the birth control pill, all of these kind of antinatalist policies that were born out of like a lot of scary fear mongering about overpopulation. And now we are in a position where the birth rate is well below replacement and has been for a long time, although nobody started talking about it until just recently. So in the United States, the average woman has 1.3 children now. That's not even enough to replace her and her spouse. And this is in every country except for, I think, 2 or 3. I think India and like a couple African countries still have a birth rate above replacement. But don't worry, because there's a lot of NGOs and foundations who are trying to work on that and get the birth rates down there too. We're seeing catastrophic population collapse in places like Japan, Canada, and most of the Western world, where you now have a much older population and not enough young people to take care of them. And in just the next 3 years, we're going to see, for the first time in human history, half of women of childbearing age not having children. This has never happened before. So half of women will not have children by the year 2027, I want to say it was. They did like a population study on this that really had some economic forecasters worried, because it turns out if you have population collapse, you can't keep the food chain supply, the supply chain up, which is why we see a lot of supply chain disruptions now. You're going to have food shortages. Even if there's enough food, there's not enough people to logistically get it to where it needs to go, and all kinds of other problems like this. And now you're seeing euthanasia programs in a lot of these countries because of that. So pretty bad.
Sorry, let me add a comment and ask a question on that. So it's interesting that you mentioned Japan, because there's this one really mind-blowing statistic that there are more adult diapers sold than there are child diapers sold in Japan. So you said we're getting to a point to where in 2027 it's projected that half of all women of childbearing age are not having babies. What was it, say, like 100 years ago or 50 years ago? Do you know the number?
Yeah. So historically, throughout all of human history, because now we can look at genetic studies to figure this out, like all the way back to ancient times, it's typically been at least 80% of women who've ever, made it past infancy had children. And in a lot of places and times, it was even higher than that. But historically, 80% of women successfully reproduced. So cutting that almost in half, like cutting that by 30%, is very catastrophic. And then one of the other side effects of this is it's a terrible name. It's somewhat of a derogatory name, but the incel problem, this problem of men just checking out of the system altogether, just deciding they're not even going to partake. They're going to have an AI girlfriend and just work from home and get a Pornhub subscription. So it's been terrible for everyone. It's been terrible for men. And I have a lot of arguments that I don't think it's been good for women. And it's been absolutely terrible for children. The effect on children is the worst. And as you probably know, broken children grow up to be broken adults. So these are really big problems that we're facing.
That's a really interesting chain of and it's really hard to discuss, because even as I was asking you that question about we're raising women's assets, income, they're earning whatever their position, and then there's this repercussion because women don't want a man who is of lower status, of lower income than them. But then what are you going to do? You're going to just like take women's jobs away? They worked hard too. It sounds just kind of messed up to say, oh, well, the solution is to not let women work anymore, or like ask questions and talk about statistics and talk about phenomenon that would suggest that the solution is to not let women work anymore. So why don't we rewind back a bit? There was one thing that I wanted to confirm. You said, and I meant to confirm it at the time, you were saying that at the time of the suffrage movement, there were more women who were against. There were more anti-suffragettes than there were suffragettes. Is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Actually, by a large margin, a really large margin. So another interesting thing that I found that I'm sure a lot of people aren't aware of is that they actually proposed referendums. So this is like a bit of irony for you. You know, the politicians of the time said maybe we should have a few referendums and see, you know, what public opinion is on women's suffrage. Let's see what happens if we give women the opportunity to vote on whether they want to vote. And it was so horrible. It was only about 4% of women even bothered to turn out, and even less actually voted in favor of suffrage. That from that point on, suffragists actually blocked women's referendums. So it was actually the pro-suffrage women saying, don't let the women vote on whether they want to vote. They would actually actively lobby and block women's referendums on voting.
Let me tell you about this one scene from this Japanese television show I was just watching. I won't set it up too much, but basically the main character is a politician in a small area of Japan called Ehime. And at one point he is debating with an opponent, and the opponent is saying, we're going to increase the amount of women in C-level jobs in Ehime, and we're going to do this and get quotas such that women are in higher positions in the workforce, and you know, we're going to make things more equal. And then the main character was saying, well, I've talked to a lot of the women in Ehime, and they don't even want that. Like, how do you know they want that? He's like, well, what do you mean? Of course they want it. It's equality.
Yeah, so I mean, people listening might be wondering, like, okay, but why would the women, you know, why would they oppose suffrage, you know? And I had mentioned earlier that you might think it was due to conditioning, but they actually had some incredible arguments. One of my things I'm trying to do is kind of bring some of the old anti-suffrage writings back to light so we can hear from the other enormous section of the women's population as to what their thoughts were on this at the time. And I have something here, and this is like an anti-suffrage poster they made in New York in 1915. This was, and this was a list of special privileges that New York women have secured under male suffrage that they didn't want to lose. So they said married women are not required to contribute to support a family. A woman may work, she may earn money and spend it as she pleases. She may own real and personal property and dispose of it or sell it without her husband's knowledge or consent. The husband cannot dispose of any real estate without the wife's consent. The wife cannot be required to pay the husband's bills, even if contracted for support of family. The husband must pay the wife's bills, whether for the family or for her own personal expenses. If the wife obtains divorce, husband must pay alimony. If husband obtains divorce, even through the wife's fault, she pays nothing. The wife may have millions and cut her husband off without a cent. The husband cannot cut the wife off, even without dower right. Meaning, a wealthy woman could marry a poor man and he was still responsible for paying for her and for the children. And then it goes on to list a few more things, including that women are exempt from military service and from jury duty. And that if the husband fails to support the wife, he may be arrested and prosecuted criminally. The wife cannot be compelled to support the husband under any circumstances, no matter how rich she may be or how poor he may be. So their argument was, look, for women to be mothers and childbearers, they need to have insured support, right? And we don't want to lose that.
So everything you said was what was already in place under male suffrage. Okay.
Yes. Yes. So this idea that women were horribly oppressed and had no choice and couldn't do anything, and they were just beaten all the time, and all these crazy things that have been blown drastically out of proportion or completely just fabricated, really. The women of the time who didn't want suffrage really valued motherhood and community. They were the people who were, keeping the churches alive. They were the community organizers. They were the ones who took care of children, orphans, the sick, the old, the infirmed, and they were very family oriented and they were very community oriented, which is something we've really lost now and we don't have anymore because the women are all in cubicles, right? So at this time, they felt very busy and very well occupied with all of these kinds of very important things that they were doing. And they said, look, we need reasonable assurance that men are going to support us if we're going to be the ones, basically holding up this whole side of society with family and children and community. And if we have equal suffrage, we will just become another political bloc. We'll lose our moral high ground. That was another argument they had. They said, right now, we're nonpartisan. We don't have to get into politics. We can be kind of the impartial moral high ground of society that can look at things through a non-political lens. If we become fully enfranchised, we become just another voting bloc. We could become just another taxpayer base. And we lose the privileges and the protections that allow us to be mothers and community caretakers and organizers. And that's exactly what happened.
It almost sounds like there's kind of an argument against women being allowed to vote, because one of the things that it does is it changes the way politicians market, basically. If they're only marketing to men, they market one way. If they're marketing to men and women, they market another way. And it's also going to change the types of policies they enact, because the group of people that they have to please is different. I think, I'm kind of treading onto some really thin ice by bringing up the concept of there could be something potentially negative of allowing women to vote. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, right. This is really interesting information that you're pointing out, or the implications of it.
I think I can thicken the ice a little bit for you on this, so that, because I get this a lot. I get this knee-jerk reaction of, why do you hate women? And it's not that way at all, of course. I have 4 daughters. I'm a woman. But a lot of people also don't realize that men's suffrage only came about just before women's suffrage. So people have this impression that in the West, in a democratic or a democratic republic in the West, that all men have always been able to vote. Totally untrue. Up until 10 years before women got the vote in England, that's when men got the vote. The male universal suffrage only happened 1 decade prior to women's universal suffrage. Before that, only 5 to 6% of men in England could vote. Suffrage was limited. It was limited in a lot of ways, by age, by, profession, or sometimes by religion or citizenship. There was a bunch of different ways it was limited in different places, and it varied. But only about 5 or 6% of men could vote until 10 years before all the women could vote there. And in the United States, men got it a little sooner, but prior to the Civil War, it was only about 4 or 5% of American men who could vote. So all of these countries started with very limited suffrage, and people have this impression that men have always been able to vote, men have always had all the freedom, and women have just been screwed for all of history. So a lot of what I do is try to go back and look at things in context and actually explain how it really was, because the version we've gotten has been this rewritten version because of standpoint history. So standpoint feminism.
Okay. So let me see. So setting the historical context makes it really interesting. I guess, again, what I start to think about is okay, then what is the practical thing we should do based on this information? We can't just take the vote away from women, and we're not saying that that's a good thing, of course. But why don't we jump ahead and take a look at some of... Oh, you were talking about how society or culture or the education system is kind of pushing a feminist narrative into women to get them to interpret society or interpret their relationship with men in a particular way that's not necessarily good?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So there's so many things that are tied in with feminism. And I think at some point, remind me that I think we wanted to talk about the veganism stuff too. But a lot of what happened with academia, it wasn't just academia. So in my book, this is very surprising to some people, but as part of the Cold War, the CIA also had a program, a propaganda program to really push feminism into the mainstream culture. Now, this did start earlier with like Edward Bernays and some of the marketing as women, started to work more and control more of money spending. Marketing companies that popped up in the 50s really started marketing things to women in a different way, but it was really the CIA through Operation Mockingbird and the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which were two secret Cold War programs that were meant to do cultural engineering and manage public opinion during the Cold War. And that's actually how we got Gloria Steinem as one of the, icons of the 60s, 70s, and ever since feminist movement, right? She's this feminist icon. And again, this was not like an organic thing where she just popped up and, oh, she's really famous now. No, she was recruited out of Smith College by the CIA. They sent her to India. They sent her to Europe to work at youth festivals and manage propaganda in foreign countries. And then when they brought her back to America, she did some work at the Playboy Mansion. And then a CIA agent named Clay Felker actually worked with her and gave her all of the money to start Ms. Magazine. And then from there, a bunch of other like feminist propaganda outlets in the media. Okay,
sorry. So real quick, so who is Gloria Steinem? She's kind of like the Greta Thunberg of feminism or something?
Yes, exactly. That's a perfect analogy. So if people remember the Shout Your Abortion campaign from several years back, she was in that. But she was like the big icon who they put in front of all the cameras. You had other feminists who were kind of popular at this time, but to be honest, feminism has always had a PR problem, which is that feminists tend to be a little unlikable, if you will, in a lot of ways. I mean, you had Betty Friedan at the time with her book, The Feminine Mystique, which was a really popular book, but she was older. She wasn't like necessarily attractive. But Gloria Steinem was kind of, she was young at the time. She was good looking. She was college educated, and she was great in front of a camera. She was great on a bullhorn, and they kind of trained her to be this way too. So they kind of selected her as an icon and pushed her to the forefront of the culture to kind of be the face of the feminist movement and to give it better PR. And then, like I was saying, Ms. Magazine, and a bunch of other, feminist magazines, pamphlets, and circulars at the time that were all CIA funded and pushed on the culture kind of as a way to manage the Cold War dialectic of like, oh, Russia is oppressive and bad, and we here in the West are free and we're liberal, and we want women to have, reproductive freedom, and we want them to have college educations, that kind of thing.
I was about to ask you, like, what is the benefit of the CIA promoting feminism through people like Gloria Steinem? But you're saying basically it was kind of a way to, let's say, virtue signal that we are better than Russia because we're more progressive and we're even more focused on equal rights for women, and we take care of our people more.
Yeah, they were kind of managing this Cold War dialectic of capitalism versus communism and of liberalism versus, socialism. So a big way to do that is to push human rights in general, but certainly women's rights. And, Roe v. Wade is happening around this time. The birth control pill becomes widely available for the first time. No-fault divorce actually starts in California in 1970. And so things are trending this way. They're also, like, a lot of people might not know just how deeply the CIA was involved in culture creation. It wasn't just feminism. It wasn't just magazines. And I think they had 400 newspapers and magazines under their purview, the CIA did, in the 70s alone. They basically managed the media. You could see it that way. TV shows and things like that. But they also had movie production. They had a big arm of the music industry under their control to disseminate propaganda as well. There's a great book called Weird Scenes from the Canyon by Dave McGowan that's about this. Jay Dyer, if you guys know his YouTube channel, he does a ton of great research on this stuff if you want more in-depth information on that. But yeah, it was kind of social engineering that came out of like Cold War dialectics is how you can kind of think of it.
So the thing about the CIA is they're doing this type of social culture engineering, but then you might ask, like, okay, that's kind of creepy that the CIA pushed this and they're influencing the culture, but is that necessarily a bad thing? But then, you can debate whether that's bad or not in and of itself, but at the end of the day, the downstream effect is these things that we're talking about with, like, for example, dramatically decreased birth rate.
Yeah, and I mean, for me as a woman, from my own standpoint, I'm a little resentful of being told my whole life that feminism was something women demanded, like that we organically, because of the oppression we were suffering, fought for and demanded this massive cultural shift. When the truth is that we were propagandized, we were conditioned, we were, I don't want to say forced, but we were definitely, like, oddly enough, coerced kind of into accepting a feminist worldview and pursuing a more feminist version of success in our lives. So we see this shift where, being like a really good mother with a large family, having, being somebody who's really important to your church functioning, to your community, to your school functioning, those things are now seen as like stuff for losers, stuff that's kind of lame. And then it's like, oh, but you never did anything with your life. You should go to college and you should have a career and you need to make money and you have to have your own savings and your own retirement and everything should be in your name. And don't change your name when you get married. And, kids are germ factories. They're icky and you can't drink as much wine, right? And you don't have any freedom. Then you have to stay home all the time with your kids and it's just been this. People don't realize that a lot of the things they think or perceive about the world, themselves, who they are, is created by the culture around them. It's created in the pop culture, in the propaganda, in the schools that you grow up in everything around you. I mean, every pop star that you could think of, every female rapper, every female singer, every female actress, they're all feminist. They're all vegans, right? They're all pretty anti-authoritarian. They're all, even every song they sing is this way. So it's not like this was just an organic thing that women demanded. It was really something that was kind of foisted upon us by powerful people. And I think that women deserve to know that about feminism.
I think that's a good time to talk about the veganism, vegetarian connection, because that's another thing that seems to be looking at things in a kind of Marxist lens of there's an oppressor, there's the oppressed. We have to, by definition, that is bad. Therefore, everything that the oppressed suffers from is due to the fault of the oppressor, so on and so on. So, yeah, what's the connection there? We were talking about getting into that, but how is there any sort of connection between these things?
Yeah. So this one, I'm so glad you asked because most people don't think of this, and I'm so happy that you did because it's actually pretty interesting and I don't get to talk about it that much. But you could go all the way back to pre-modern times to Pythagoras and Plato if you wanted to, but I think that's a little beyond the scope for today. So we'll kind of talk about 1840s, right, is really kind of when this takes off. In the 1840s alone, there were over 80 experimental utopian communities just in the United States, and there were even more in Europe. And these were Marxist, socialist, for the most part. There were a few other ones that kind of came out of some weird Protestant cults that I do talk about in my book. But it was mostly this Marxist socialist ethos of like experimenting with communes and things like that. And one of the big pillars of your experimental utopian community had to be feminism, because we can't transcend, oppression until the sexes are equal. Okay, kind of makes sense. But then they would expand this to animal rights and to, at the time, they're called vegetarian diets. I don't know that the term vegan had been coined yet, but they had a lot of very bizarre diets. There was even something called the reform diet among suffragists, where they were vegetarians and they would meet at vegetarian restaurants to, organize. And you think, wow, why would that be? Well, the reason is because feminism by nature is anti-Christian. It's kind of anti-Abrahamic faith, or it's anti-Islam, anti-Judaism, anti-Christian, because those are seen as traditionally patriarchal religions. And we have Arthur Schopenhauer talking about rejection of anthropocentrism, this idea that human beings are like at the top of the order, because we're in a time when we're rejecting hierarchy, right? And we're trying to transcend like the evils of the world.
You mean Schopenhauer was promoting the idea of let's not put humans at the top of the hierarchy?
Yes, he didn't see a reason why. This is where we start to see the thinking switch over to we're not thinking from like a Christian paradigm anymore. We're thinking in Darwinian terms, because let's not forget that Darwinism is coming about at this exact same time, and it's becoming the dominant scientific view. So from a Darwinist perspective, people are just smarter animals, really. We're just animals who have evolved a little bit more, but that's no reason that we shouldn't treat other sentient creatures the same that we should treat humans. And if we're going to talk about oppression, well, we have to look at the oppression of animals. So feminists really grab onto this for a couple of reasons. One is it kind of exploits our maternal instinct, right? We have this very strong maternal instinct to protect babies and children and to cuddle them and snuggle them and feed them and all these things. And we're very much that way with animals, right? With little baby animals. And so you see, you know, factory farming coming along with the industrial age, which, let's be honest, there's a lot about factory farming that's not so great. And there was also vivisection happening at this time in the mid 1800s. And that's like animal experimentation, comes along with scientific discovery, right? So you had a lot of suffragists who were anti-vivisectionists, and they would do animal rights activism for that reason. And then they would further say, we shouldn't be eating dairy or eggs because you are exploiting the female animals. You are raping them, you know, you're exploiting animals. And they saw, so as part of this rejection of Christianity, this rejection of hierarchy, they turned to things like earth worship, nature worship, seeing the natural world as good and feminine. Mother Earth, right? Mother Earth is good. She knows what's best. Nature, the noble savage myth, this idea that nature is this utopian, Edenic ideal, that nature is the Garden of Eden, and that it's ruined by men, because men are the violent oppressors who are exploiting the animals, they're exploiting the women, they're exploiting the workers, right? So it's the part of this Hegelian master-slave dialectic that was very popular at the time, combined with all this, you know, scientific experimentation and Marxism. It's like this perfect little pressure cooker that made it very logical for animal rights activism, vegetarianism to go along with feminism. And so you might be shocked to know that this wasn't just something radical hippie girls in the 70s were doing. This is something that radical suffrage ladies were doing in the 1840s and 1850s. And a lot of these experimental communes that were vegetarian also experimented a lot with things like having the women do the hard labor and having the men do the childcare. Almost none, right, I know. None of these lasted. So in my research, I went over dozens of them. And I think the longest one lasted like 7 years, maybe. And of course, almost all of them were funded by a wealthy Marxist somewhere, right? So it's, again, this irony of we reject materialism and exploitation, but we want to start a hippie commune. So we have to find a rich person to fund it so that we can make the vision come true. So that's kind of where the root of it comes in.
I'm guessing that the connection is that they both sort of stem from this Marxist oppressor-oppressed type thing.
Yes. And from that idea of nature worship, this idea, you see this with like the eco-feminists, you see this with the Greenpeace activists, where it's like nature is inherently good and humanity is inherently bad, even though we're part of nature. And it's really the men, like Terence McKenna, the psychedelic icon of the 80s, he loved to talk about goddess worship and Mother Earth. And he would always say, we have to make everything more feminine. We have to get rid of masculinity. We have to get rid of this toxic masculinity and return to the goddess, because women will take care of nature. The men just want to exploit nature, which is absolutely preposterous if you look at a lot of data. But this was the idea. Mother Earth good, man bad, you know?
It doesn't really make sense if you think about it. So for example, a ruminant, we have so many cows in captivity and they spend 3/4 of their life on a ranch. They're just chilling outside. very safely eating grass. They're in a very safe, protected environment, very low stress environment because there's no predators. And then they go into a feedlot. They are kind of at a buffet with their peers. It doesn't really look appealing at all. It's kind of hard to imagine that a cow would enjoy being set in a stall and just be eating these fattening grains all again. So that 1/4 part of their life probably doesn't look so good. But then it's like, well, what are they doing in nature? They're like kind of clumping together, trying to avoid predators. They try to situate themselves so only the ruminants on the perimeter have to get destroyed by the predators. And then usually when they are killed by a predator, it's not a quick bolt to the head that immediately ceases their life. It's usually they're eaten alive, and most of the times, if it's a wolf, the wolf will go straight for the crotch, because that is the part that will immediately kind of, floor them, because it's just so painful. And then they're eaten alive, and it's a very terrible thing. Yeah. So,
from my perspective, I have noticed, and certainly in my research, the people who have this view of nature as this Edenic, perfect thing that human men then go and exploit and ruin, they tend to be people who've lived all of their life in an urban environment and don't have a lot of direct contact with nature. I was raised out in the country and farmland. Let me tell you, nature is not kind. It's not kind and sweet and cuddly like the Disney movies. I think that especially now we have a lot of anthropomorphization of animals, giving them very human characteristics. They always have the big, cute eyes, and they love their mama, and somebody comes and kills Bambi's mom and everybody gets sad. But yeah, I think it's more a symptom of urbanization, right? And people being very disconnected from what nature is. And so they're able to see it in this Edenic, peaceful, sweet, kind way that isn't really reflective of reality. But that's certainly how most of these like radical feminists felt about it.
Yeah, it's funny because, I mean, spend a little bit of time in nature and you see that like literally every component is trying to kill you. If there's not a predator trying to kill you, there's bugs sucking your blood. There's even plants trying to kill you and poison you and like stab you with their pokey stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, that's exactly. It's easy to make fun of, but it's like, it's interesting concepts that I feel are trying to ignore a part of reality. Like, you have to have hierarchies in reality. I mean, I don't know how well people are going to take this, but I feel like women are the determiners of the human hierarchy. That is kind of their role to a degree, because they're very interested in men with more status, with more resources, with better physical presentation, better genetics. And so they will select men who are higher and higher up in the hierarchy. And so they're kind of like, in a way, they are maintaining the human hierarchy to a degree. Of course, the way that works has been modified quite a lot due to modernity. But would you agree with that? Do you think that's a kind of weird take?
No, I think that's a great take. In fact, I make the argument all the time that what I posit feminism did was it took a natural balance of power and threw it completely out of whack. So again, those genetic studies I mentioned earlier that show 80% of women have been successful in reproducing over the course of human history, from what we can tell. They also say that only 40% of men historically have ever been able to pass on their genes. So women have an incredible advantage as far as genetics go, as far as choosing what the genetic lineage is going to be, who gets to reproduce, whose genes go forward into the future and whose do not. That's an incredible kind of power to have, even if maybe you're not involved in politics, right? And women have historically been protected and provided for and things of that nature. And now men seem less inclined to do that because women have been telling them for 50 years quite angrily, we'll do it ourselves and we don't need you, right? And I do a lot of debates with feminists because I think it's a very good way to I understand where they're coming from. Okay. Because of all my research, I know why they think the things they think. And a good way for me to shatter their delusions is to have like this Socratic back and forth where I kind of break down the worldview. And they really, modern women now, especially the younger generation that's grown up in the digital age, have this perception that the modern technological world, which allows them to be career boss girls, just kind of exists. It's just kind of there, right? They get up in the morning, they turn on their lights, they drive their car to work on a road that the man built, and they go to work in a skyscraper that men built, and all these things. Men still occupy 90% of infrastructure jobs. Men still build and maintain this modern world that allows us to be boss ladies, okay? And younger girls don't think about that. They've never had to think about that. And so I'll kind of break this down for them and be like, do you think that if there was a catastrophic thing that took out the power grid, are the women going to go put it back up? Probably not, right? So maybe we should just consider that we can't even have this feminism. There's a reason that it came about after the Industrial Revolution and not before. And men are the ones who build and create the world. So it took this natural balance of power where, yes, men had the monopoly on force, but women had the monopoly on reproduction. We're the choosers, right? And there was a bit of a natural balance of power in that way. And now it's women should own everything and have all the power and control, and men are dirt under our feet who should only exist if we allow them to, kind of an attitude that I think has, just broken down the entire fabric of society and all the effects that we've talked about. So
things have gotten more equal, right? So are women happier?
No. No, they're not. And there's a lot of metrics we can look at to determine that. Because that was my big question too, right? It's like, well, maybe all this was worth it if the women are just crushing it, right? If the women are just having a great time and life's awesome for them. You could argue that in some ways it's better. But in most of the ways you argue it's better, it's more a result of technological advancement, again, mostly contributed to men. Things like sanitation, antibiotics, and things that have made childbirth much safer for us, made pregnancy much safer for us, made our lives much longer, even than men's, right? A lot of the things that improve life for women are more a result of technological advancement than they are social justice. The social justice stuff has actually created a lot of problems for women. There was a landmark study that was done in 2009 called The Paradox of Female Happiness. And this made a big splash when it came out because women didn't like a lot of the data that was in there because it said that we've actually seen women report lower levels of happiness from 1970 on. And it's due to multiple factors. One is this idea that we tell women they have to do everything and be everything all at the same time, right? You have to go to school, you have to get a degree, you have to have a career, and then you get married, and then you have kids, and then you have to balance work and career, and you have to somehow try to keep your marriage together while you're trying to do all of that. And women are finding out that it's very hard to have like 7 full-time jobs, right? I always say when women have a full-time career, that turns motherhood into something you try to squeeze in on the weekends and in the evenings. And I don't think most of us are truly really happy with that. We're just told that that's what successful women do, right? If you're worth your salt, you'll make this work, kind of a thing. So there's a lot of pressure. There's not much time for self-care. There's not much time for leisure. And that's another reason we see a lot of divorce. Also, there's an epidemic of loneliness, and that doesn't just affect men, it affects women. Women are the primary users of psychiatric medications. Over 26% of American adult women are now on at least one prescription drug for psychiatric purposes. So an antidepressant and anti-anxiety medication, something like that. They abuse alcohol at higher rates than we've ever seen since we started keeping track, which is really sad to me. And women have much more detrimental effects from alcohol disordered use than men do. Our bodies are smaller, our livers are smaller, we have less blood volume, we're just smaller humans. But even when we drink the same for our size as a man, it tends to affect us worse due to biological differences. There's a lot of women who, once they get into their later years and realize they've kind of forgone family and other things for career have a lot of regrets, and they do report that. That's why we see the highest antidepressant use among like boomer age women, like in their 55 and older. And then we see other kind of surprising effects like, yes, women are graduating college more, but we now hold the majority of college debt. So the average young woman graduates college with at least $36,000 in debt. And that's kind of, that's it's a big obstacle as a young woman when you're thinking about, oh, maybe I do want kids, right? But I've got all this debt. I've invested all this time and effort in college and my career. So it's kind of like these ideas sound great, but in practice, it's actually very hard for women. And I think a lot of that is some of the cognitive dissonance that comes with feminism at the same time, like what we've been talking about this whole time. Like, I'm supposed to see men as violent oppressors, yet they built this world that allows me to be a strong, independent woman, that kind of thing. It becomes very hard over the course of your life to reconcile conflicting cognitive dissonance and not go crazy from it. So the other big thing, I would say this is my biggest and best argument, is that one of the primary things feminism promised us was it was going to make things safer for women and children. And oh man, if you look at the statistics on that, it's heartbreaking. My latest Substack piece is called "Are Patriarchs Protectors or Oppressors?" And it goes over 45 years of data from the US government in something called the National Incident Study. It's called the NIS. We've had 4 of them since 1978. And it takes data from all of the organizations across the country that deal with like women's shelters, child protective services, emergency room departments, women's charities, any organizations that would be dealing with things like domestic abuse. And it shows that actually women are much less safe now that marriage has been destroyed than they ever were. So you're actually statistically much safer to be married to a husband than you are to be in a living situation with a boyfriend, which is kind of the dominant thing now, right? The rates of abuse are much higher there.
Okay, I see. So women are more likely to be abused if they're living with someone that they're not married to.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of the alternative living situations that have kind of been encouraged through feminism, like, lesbian relationships, have the highest rate of domestic abuse. And then we see welfare for children being absolutely destroyed. So when they look at child abuse, the safest situation for children by far, by a huge margin, is to live in the home with both married biological parents. When children live with one parent and that parent's new partner, the instance of abuse goes up over 10 times. Every other living situation besides 2 married biological parents is extremely statistically more dangerous for children. And that goes for sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse. It goes for severe abuse and, less severe forms of abuse like neglect. So, all the things feminism was supposed to do for women and children, it's actually made it worse. And that's why I took the time to write that piece and really parse out all the data and make all the arguments to really illustrate it for people, because I think you have to almost see it in black and white to get the full impact of how bad it is.
Do you think it's kind of a self-perpetuating problem where people will see the problems in the world and then they'll be like, oh, patriarchy at it again. We need feminism more than ever. To fix all these issues, but they're not realizing how feminism has led to these downstream effects.
Yeah, and I do think that's the knee-jerk reaction for sure. And it's because of the thinking on this. So if you actually think about it from a more rational perspective, who are the people you go to? If a man is abusing someone, a woman, a child, a weaker man, you go to a stronger man to get him to stop. Because men, whether you like it or not, men do have the monopoly on force. So if you need to stop a bad man, you need a good man. What does that tell us? That tells us that by removing the man who's got the most vested interest in the welfare of his wife, his children, right? A man doesn't marry a woman and make children with her and invest his time, his life, his resources into those people because he wants to abuse them. And it's been almost portrayed that way, right? We're supposed to believe that throughout history, men didn't care for their wives, for their sisters, for their mothers, for their daughters. Now, of course, there's bad things that happen. Bad people do bad things, but men as a whole are not these evil aggressors. And we actually see this in the data because when we look at child abuse, children are much more often abused by mothers than by fathers. Now, feminists historically would take this data point and they would say, well, now hold on a minute. That's because women spend the most time with the kids. That's why women tend to be, responsible for something like 68% of all child abuse. And the fathers are responsible for like much less, 37% or something like that. They say, well, it's because women are spending all the time, right? And they're very stressed out. It's very difficult. But there's a problem. There's a problem with that argument. And here's the problem. Men have gotten a lot more parenting time and a lot more custody over the last 40 years. In fact, they've gotten 4 times as much parenting time and custody as they had in 1980. So if men were the problem, if violence and, violence towards children is specifically a problem we see in men, we should have seen that go up, or we should have at least see it go up among children who are living with their father only, right? Well, we didn't. That's not what we see at all. We see that the rates of child abuse are pretty just across the board stagnant, and that in some cases they actually go down the more that the father is around. And then we see all risk factors for children increase to ridiculous levels when the father's not in the home. So 90% of homeless children come from a fatherless home. 80% of children who end up in a juvenile treatment facility for drug or alcohol abuse from a fatherless home. 70% of kids who are in juvenile detention centers come from fatherless homes. Very interestingly, they did a study on children's psychiatric wards and found that 88% of children admitted to a psych ward had a disrupted family situation, meaning something other than both biological parents living at home. So the data could not be more clear that having the father in the home is protective, not only for children, but also for the mothers. It just happens to be the case. And it does make sense when you think about the fact that, yeah, a man is going to be more likely to protect his own wife and his own children than he would maybe stepchildren or his girlfriend's kids or something like that. You know what I mean? Men do care about paternity, and they do care about legacy and investing their resources in those places. So yeah, feminism is not protective of women. It actually makes us more exposed to risk, unfortunately.
And then you have people like Robert Downey Jr., interestingly, happens to be vegan, was saying that we should have a matriarchy because then we would never have any wars. But wasn't there a study? I didn't confirm this, so if this is incorrect, I'll have to double check this. Maybe you might know. Wasn't there a study or a survey or some investigation showing that historically women are more likely to go towards, violent action?
Yes, that is true. Historically, female leaders, to the extent that they have power, tend to be more hawkish when it comes to war. We also see some other good examples of when women do have power over someone weaker than them, that they are actually more likely to exploit the power. And there's reasons for this. So I'll try to be fair and explain the reasoning behind why. It's not just because women are evil, right? But so for example, in juvenile facilities where women are the prison guards. So say you have a young girl's home or a young girl's juvie facility, and you've got female guards running it. You see 90-something% of the abuses happening in those facilities from the female guards. In women's prisons, you actually see higher rates of assault from women on women than you do in men's prisons.
Yeah, you mentioned that about lesbian couples.
Yep. And among lesbian couples, they have the highest rate of domestic violence. And the reason they think this is the case is because When men are young, you might have heard studies where when young boys do rough and tumble play with their dad, it's very beneficial for them, and it actually makes them more empathetic and more measured in their emotional control. And the reason for that is they learn what happens when you don't have control over your physical force, because men do have the monopoly on force. Men are bigger and they're stronger than women and children are. So they learn at a young age, like, oh, I can hurt my friend accidentally. I'm not even meaning to. I just got carried away and I can really do some damage. So men learn from a younger age to kind of control that, especially when they have their dad in the home. Women don't have the option of using force against men unless they use a force multiplier, meaning like a weapon of some kind, something that would actually allow them to do damage. So when they do damage, they tend to do more because of not only the force multiplier, but because women are not as practiced at kind of like keeping that under control, keeping the emotions under wraps, right? They're not quite as practiced at that by the time they're adults as men are. And then we have the fact that women, due to hormonal and brain chemistry differences, do tend more to be prone to mental illness and depression and to things like neuroticism, neurotic traits. They tend to just be a little bit more challenged in containing their emotions in a lot of ways than men do. So when women are in a position to abuse power, we do see that it tends to be more often and a little bit worse than men. And they think that those are the reasons why.
As you're saying that, I'm kind of extrapolating that to some other things. So for example, would you say it's safe to say that men are they have more boundaries established for them? They're notified of boundaries a lot more. So for example, not just with, you're playing with your dad and you think you're having a good time wrestling, and then you just hook him in the face. You'll probably learn pretty quickly that that is a boundary that you should no longer cross in the next play session, right? So there's the physical boundaries in rough and tumble play. But then also, I feel like it's a kind of a good analogy because you have a boundary where it's too much violence, you're harming the other person. But then you have these kind of like, let's say, soft, unwritten, unspoken respect boundaries when you do something that is not necessarily harming a person, but is showing disrespect, particularly towards, not always just the man, but I would say the father is more likely to enforce boundaries of respect. You're being disrespectful, so then boom, you get notified real quickly. So what am I trying to say there? I'm not trying to say that women are, inherently more disrespectful, but just when it comes to violence, at least they have not been notified of boundaries. It's not been trained into your brain that when you get really pissed off, even no matter how pissed off you are, you don't just go and sock the other guy in the face. You have to be like, oh, whoa, I'm really pissed. I don't know what to do. Walk away, do something else. Don't come back and, punch him in the head or stab him with something.
Well, I mean, that is also, you're totally right about that. It's exactly spot on. And socially, men work in a hierarchy. Okay. So if you have a bunch of guys coming into a party, they kind of sort each other out right away. They kind of establish, or like in a workplace, if they're working on a project together, they kind of sort out the hierarchy pretty quick. On a playground, little boys will kind of sort out the hierarchy of, who's the biggest alpha guy, who's his second in command, who are the guys who are going to be the worker bees, that kind of thing. Men have to cooperate and work within a hierarchy because of the threat of force. Women don't have that. Women work in cooperation, and we work in competition for the best mate. So women are used to having to balance cooperation and competition, and not really having to deal with that threat of force, at least from other women. So when you take women and put them in a situation where you're telling them they should act like men, this is why you would see, like at, Antifa demonstrations, some little 5'2" little, Antifa activist girl in flip-flops and leggings going up to a 6'2" patriot, military guy, thinking she can like slap him in the face or something. And then he just, that's kind of how that works. It's like women don't experience that. They don't have that experience, where men, from the time they're babies all the way through adulthood, they know where, like you said, they know where the boundaries are, and they know there's consequences, right? There could be dire consequences if you just pop off and do something crazy. Whereas women don't. We're a little bit more protected from that, I would say. So one of the ways that we see Marxism, feminism, and then veganism or vegetarianism kind of all infiltrating the university systems in something that we would call institutional capture. It's a really important way of understanding how certain narratives become dominant, how certain worldviews become mainstream. And this is through, institutional capture. So I'll explain a little bit about the Fabian Society and how instrumental they were in this whole thing that we're talking about. So the Fabian Society actually started off first as something called the Fellowship of the New Life. And this was a socialist, kind of vegetarian, feminist little group of intellectuals in London in 1883, I want to say. Yeah. And they founded like a humanist ethics movement that wanted this egalitarian worldview we've been talking about. They had a couple of women in the group, and they wanted like a socialist utopia with respect and rights for men, women, and also animals. So they followed this pretty strict vegetarian diet. They rejected competition. They embraced pacifism, right? Kind of this utopian socialist ethos of the time. Well, a bunch of prominent members from the Fellowship of the New Life founded the Fabian Society. They kind of splintered off from each other, but remained friendly and cooperative. And there were some huge names you guys might recognize who were part of the Fabian Society. Havelock Ellis was an intellectual in Europe who actually had a long-standing affair with Margaret Sanger, from the founder of Planned Parenthood. Obviously a feminist icon, and he was very influential on her and she on him, and they kind of both dabbled in occult practices and then vegetarian diets. We also have Annie Besant, the theosophist, H.G. Wells, who was very influential at the turn of the century in like the sci-fi world and in politics and literature. He did a vegetarian diet for a time as well and was a member of the Fabian Society. George Bernard Shaw, another really influential British intellectual, and Emmeline Pankhurst, the queen of the British suffragettes, and then also Bertrand Russell. I mean, you can't even talk about the 20th century without talking about Bertrand Russell. He also was a time for a Fabian, also for a time did a vegetarian diet and was a big proponent of women's rights. So you might find it interesting that the Fabians, they actually had a coat of arms, and it was a wolf in sheep's clothing. You can find it if you just Google the Fabian Society coat of arms. It will come up, and it was literally a wolf dressed as a sheep. Now later they actually got rid of that because obviously it's not very PR friendly. But the whole idea of Fabianism was this slow incrementalism, this institutional creep. We will slowly infiltrate the political system, the university system, any of the existing institutions. They would talk about this slow, imperceptible change. So they also had a mascot, which was a tortoise. It's kind of like the idea of a frog boiling in water, that if you turn up the water slowly, people don't notice what you're doing.
So their key thing was to push vegetarianism through academia? Is that what you mean?
They wanted to push Marxism as a whole, but two big pillars of that was feminism and then like this vegetarian vegan diet thing. And the reason for that is they were Marxist social democrats, and they wanted like this, they had this socialist utopian vision that would eventually become hopefully a stateless society or like a one world government. That was the idea. So they knew that the revolutionary stuff was pretty unpopular, right? At this time, there's like the Bolshevik Revolution going on, which was extremely bloody and unpopular in the West. And they said, we don't want to be revolutionaries. We don't just want to bomb everybody and start riots and take over governments by force. It's going to be much more effective to infiltrate all of the existing institutions slowly over time so that people won't even really notice what we're doing. And they were very successful in doing that. They actually went on to found the London School of Economics. They had another married couple, Sidney and Beatrice Webb, who were vegetarian and feminist activists who were very influential traveled the world kind of on their behalf, helping to infiltrate institutions in America, Europe, Russia, pretty much everywhere. So that's kind of, if you're wondering, how did this happen? How did we go from having these universities that had great reputations a couple hundred years ago, like Oxford and Cambridge and you know, Harvard and Yale, and now they're all filled with Marxists who are teaching standpoint theory and climate crisis? You know, we all have to go meatless and eat the Impossible burgers, right, to save the planet. How did we get here to where this is dominating academia when it's so unacademic and it seems so unfactual? Well, that's kind of how it happened. This small group of intellectuals who were funded by very wealthy elites slowly capture the institutions and become the dominant force in the culture. If you want a degree, you got to go to these universities and you have to take their courses and you have to do a doctorate or a master's under one of these professors who are chosen, you know, by people with this belief structure. So that's how it became the dominant thing.
So we had the Fabian Society, which was pushing this kind of Marxist thing of feminism and veganism, vegetarianism. How influential are we supposed to assume that they were? Like, were they, maybe they're just some small group who was trying to do this thing, but you know, they didn't really do anything and everyone ignored them?
Well, they actually founded the Labour Party in the UK, which is pretty huge, pretty influential. And then in the United States, they kind of slowly infiltrated the Democrat Party. They actually have some more neocons in the Republican Party here too, as well. But most of those kind of globalist, socialist leaning, even people who are into like the monopoly capital of today, tend to come out of Fabian schools of thought. And of course, if they created the London School of Economics, that's an incredibly influential institution that has done most of the economic forecasting for like the EU forever. So, and these institutions also have a great deal to say about what goes on in the banking world as well. So the London School of Economics is certainly going to churn out the people who are going to be the future people who run some of the biggest banks in the world, who inform their economic policy, who work with, you know, the Federal Reserve or other economic institutions that set monetary policy. So the Fabian creep actually worked so incredibly well, and it was far more influential than people know, but that was by design. As I said, they said, we have to do this in almost an imperceptible way. And a lot of the Fabian thinkers I just mentioned came out of this elite group in London at the time. So you might notice, you're going to hear a lot of London and New York in all the people I'm talking about. A lot of the centers and hubs of where this happened were London and New York, and those are the cities that most heavily influenced, you know, the West over the last 200 years. They're the hubs of economic and academic and political activity. So they just have a tremendous amount of influence. That's why if you look at like an electoral map in the United States, you see the coasts and these big metropolitan areas are completely blue, and then everything else is red. And it's pretty similar in Europe. It's geographically set up a little different, but it is somewhat similar there, but it's much more pronounced here. And even in Canada is a bit that way too.
I'm always trying to like see how I can connect whatever I talk about or whatever I'm working on to some sort of practical behavior or practical shift in worldview that would actually be beneficial. And I've got, my audience is, I think, 85% men, if I remember my demographics correctly. Well, obviously I'd like you to answer for both sexes, but with your work and your book and the stuff that you're digging into, what is kind of the practical insights that we can glean, like a way we should shift our mindset that would be more beneficial, or things that we can do based on this information that would make us have more satisfying, beneficial lives that benefit our communities more?
Yeah, we should definitely talk about some possible helpful things and not just leave you guys with this big black pill that I've just dropped in your lap, right? Well, I think the good news, well, I always say it this way, the bad news is that women are very easily propagandized. But the good news is that women are very easily propagandized. So in the same way that we just talked about how all these things came to be, how this worldview filled with cognitive dissonance and like seemingly contradictory ideas and ironic, you know, like we want socialist utopia, but we're going to use billionaires to fund it, like these crazy contradictory things. The same way those became dominant worldviews, we can kind of undo them in the same way. The French feminist Simone de Beauvoir once said in an interview with Betty Friedan, she said, "We cannot allow women the choice to stay home and raise their children, because if there is such a choice, too many will choose that one." So she knew that women inherently, like for biological and psychological reasons, want to be mothers, right? The drive to reproduce, especially in women, the drive to be mothers is extremely strong. Most women, if there's any ladies watching this, you probably had baby fever at some point when you're young. It's pretty common. We tend to beat it out of women when they're young these days, but that drive is there. Susan B. Anthony also said that women's liberation would have never happened if we left it up to women, because they are too family oriented and they are too conservative. And so we have to get the men behind it to push this. And the way they did that was through the sexual revolution and convincing men that, hey, look, you can get all this free sex with no strings attached. Doesn't that sound great? You don't have to court some lady and marry her and support her. You can just have sex with her. You can just be friends. Won't that be great? Well, and a lot of men did think that, like, especially my dad's generation, they thought, well, that sounds cool. We'll go to like Woodstock and get some free love, man. Well, 20 years down the road, they're getting taken to the cleaners in family court and losing half of everything they've ever worked for, and their lives are destroyed. And they're like, wow, maybe that wasn't a great trade-off. So Thomas Sowell always said there's no solutions, only trade-offs. I don't think the trade-offs we've seen from feminism have been good for anyone, not for men, not for women, not for children. And I think if we can make it cool again to be moms, this is what I always say the point of my work is. Everyone's like, well, what do you want out of all this? I want to make it cool for a 5-year-old girl, for somebody to say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And if she says, I want to be a mom, for that to be a valid response, because it isn't right now. If you ask a little girl what she wants to be when she grows up, she thinks she has to say, I want to be an astronaut or the president or a CEO of a corporation. Little girls play with baby dolls for a reason. We have a maternal instinct, but right now the culture literally beats it out of us. I know this myself because I have 5 children, and I've been called every slur you can think of. I've been called a baby factory. I've been accused of being brainwashed, that I couldn't hack it in the career world. I must not be smart, and that's why I'm a stay-at-home mom. These kind of things. And I think we can, just as the culture got shifted one way, it can be shifted back. And I think men have a lot more power than they realize to do this. Women still want male attention. And right now, women think the way to get male attention is to be an Instagram booby girl, or, a live streamer with lots of cleavage, or to start an OnlyFans, right? That's what girls think is success. And I think if the more high value men, the successful men, start to kind of require, look, no, I value chastity. I value a woman who wants leadership from me. I value a woman who wants to raise her own children herself and not put our children in a daycare for 40 or 50 hours a week. I value a traditional woman that wants to stay married to me. If men start to make that the cool thing, you will see women's behavior change pretty quickly, because they still do want male attention. And if you make it acceptable and laudable and respectable again, and you make housewives and mothers venerated again, more women will choose that. If it's of any consolation to the guys out there, I get dozens of messages a week from women who are telling me things like, I'm in my 3rd year of dental school and all I want to do is quit and marry my boyfriend and have babies, but my parents won't understand. My friends will think I'm crazy. They just don't feel like it's even an acceptable choice. And they're talking to me, some strange lady on the internet who wrote a book, because they don't know who else they can say that to. And it would blow your mind. I think I'll do a stream where the women who give me permission, if I black out their name, like I'll show some of what they're trying to say, because they do feel tremendous pressure. Like, I have to be a career woman. My parents expect me to use my education and work a job. And I feel like I'm not worthy if I'm not doing these things and living this way. And women don't want to be the only one, right? You don't want to be the only one in your friend group who doesn't have a job and doesn't go to college. That was me, and it's hard. So if we can create more support for women to be women again, I really think that they will.
Do you think things are set up now to where it's almost lonely if you have these aspirations? It's kind of contributing to this loneliness issue we have, is that if you say, oh, I just really want to be a mom, then you don't really have anyone who relates to that, and you're kind of lonely and ostracized.
Yeah, definitely. There's women that contact me and like join my Discord group, or follow me on Twitter, because they're like, oh my gosh, it's another like stay-at-home mom, and you're smart and articulate, and you're not some dumb bimbo like everyone thinks we are, right? People have this stereotype of what a stay-at-home mom is like, that we're either like fundamentalist sister wife types, or we're like these brain dead kind of loser types. And there's a lot of women who want this life. They want to be with their children, because 95% of the time you will ever spend with your children is gone by the time they turn 18. And that's it. And you don't ever get it back. So I tell women, even if your mother-in-law doesn't approve, or even if your parents don't get it, or even if your boss thinks you're crazy for quitting your corporate job, even if you have to downsize and maybe just have one car instead of two, it's worth it, and you should do it, because you can't turn back the hands of time. And there's a whole second half of life. If you raise your kids and they're grown up and moved out by the time you're 45, statistically, you've probably got another 35, 40 years of living to do. And at that point, there's a lot of time to do other things. Now my children are mostly grown. I wrote a book. I'm doing this podcast with you. It's not like life's over for me, but I'm certainly glad. I have no regrets about choosing to be a mom and a wife and nurture my marriage with my husband and make it the best and the strongest it could be, and spend that time with my kids. So if we encourage that in women and we make it cool again, most of them are going to want that. Now, as far as like the socioeconomic portion, feminism is kind of it's almost ending itself, because as we said, there's this crashing birth rate, economic instability. We're in a recession right now. The supply chains have been disrupted since 2020, and that's not really improving like they told us it would. And we have a labor shortage. We have this epidemic of lonely elderly people with nobody to take care of them. We have an epidemic of younger lonely men, and I feel like it's kind of unsustainable. So at some point, something's probably going to have to give. Now I'm hoping optimistically that it doesn't have to be a collapse of some kind and then a reset, which is what we see in history. I had Professor Edward Dutton on my show to talk about the historical cycle that we see of the rise of an empire peaks, and right as it's on the decline, that's when we see feminism emerge. So there's like precedent for this in the Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire and in other empires through history. So I'm hoping we don't have to go through that cycle, but we may.
Along with the rise in feminism, what effect do you think it has on men? Like, are men becoming more, is it everyone's becoming more feminine due to the feminist narrative? Is it shifting how men behave, or is it only shifting how women behave?
Oh, it's definitely had a huge impact on how men behave. And it actually is because of like the twofold thing we talked about. There's all the feminist conditioning, right? A lot of young men are raised with no dad. They have a female authority figure in the home. They go to daycare and there's a female authority figure there. They go to a public school where 85% of elementary teachers are women. So they have a female authority figure there. They go to university, which is specifically catered towards women and women's success, and telling little boys to sit still in a desk all day and like write and do crafts. It doesn't work out. That's why boys have such a hard time in the public school system, which is another reason I advocate for homeschooling. So we see them feminized in this way, right? Lack of father figure, only female authority figures, and then the entire culture screaming at them that toxic masculinity is the problem. The Barbie movie, which just came out, is like kind of the pinnacle of this, right? Ken is just, nobody cares. He's just an accessory, a brainless boy toy. And the Barbies are the strong, independent, smart ones that run everything and make everything nice. And the boys just ruin everything. So they're raised with all of that. And then on top of that, I'm sure you've probably covered this on your channel, given how your content is, the crashing testosterone rates, crashing fertility rates in men. We're seeing men just kind of check out, but like that vegan diet stuff, the manufactured food, the industrialization of food, the lack of physical activity in young men creates like a physically weaker man with less testosterone, less sex drive, less drive in general, right? Testosterone is not this hormone of aggressiveness that people think it is. It's really, it gives men mental clarity and focus. It gives them drive. It gives them energy. So it makes men big, strong, smart, successful, and innovative. And that's kind of been robbed from them too.
It also makes them more likely to disagree. So more likely to win some narrative that in their gut, they can feel this doesn't really make sense. If their testosterone is lower, they're more likely to be like, oh, okay, you know, all right, well, if you say so, I'll do that. There was another thing I was thinking of. I was just talking with a friend about it this morning. It seems like there are more feminine solutions to masculine problems.
Yeah, that comes, I mean, oh, that drives me a little bit crazy. It's one of the reasons why, like, I get a lot of criticism because I always say that I only vote for two reasons. One is to cancel the vote of a feminist somewhere, and the other is to double my husband's vote, and that gets everybody upset. It's kind of me trolling a little, but not really. I do think that male leadership, we can see like the trends over the last 150 years in the electorate, in lawmaking, in the economy, and see that like when men were men and they ran things, it tended to be so much more efficient and a lot more innovative. We've had this massive decline in innovation. We have giant welfare states. We have a huge security nanny state, right? And we have this dominant way of thinking that masculinity is violent and problematic and bad. And it's completely untrue. And I think I benefited quite a bit from, you know, I've been married for 16 years to a masculine, really great, virtuous, strong man. He's 100% in control of his emotions. He's as reliable as he could ever be. And it's such a stabilizing force in my life that I'm like, I don't think women who've never experienced that don't know what that's like. I don't think they understand the stabilizing security factor of having competent men who are in control of themselves and can handle their business. It's like it actually prevents all of the chaos and violence and problems that we're talking about. So I would love to see a return to men being masculine. It's just that the whole culture and all of society, just like it beats the motherhood out of young girls, it beats the masculinity out of men at a young age, because I've heard my dad talk about this, about how, you know, female teachers, female authority figures, his ex-wife, like these people have always told him like, he's the problem. You're not emotional enough. You're not this. And he's just, no matter what he did was never enough, you know, even though he's building everything and paying for everything and taking care of it, it's just never enough. And you see this a lot with modern women where they say, oh, I want the man to be 6 foot tall and I want him to make 6 figures and I want him to provide me with this high standard of living. But I'm also going to complain if he works too much and doesn't pay enough attention to me. And it's like, again, there's trade-offs for everything, right? So if you want this high status, successful male, he's not going to just sit there all day and dote on you and give you like endless amounts of attention and focus all of his energies on you. So I think it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of the differences between the sexes and that those are not bad things. We can cooperate together and the world works great. And now we are stuck in this quagmire where we're trying to get the women to act more like men and the men to act more like women, and everything's broken.
Yeah, there's this kind of thing, this thing about what you're saying about the female authority figures telling your father that he's not emotional enough, and that's a bad thing.
Right.
I don't think it's good to teach men that, in general. Of course, there's always context, always different situations where it makes sense, but in general, it's better to be more emotional, because who does that help? You know, when you're trying to do your work, focus on your studies, be diligent and not play video games and not mope about whatever, this or that, instead of doing your work and, you know, building up your life. If you're focusing too much on your emotions, you're kind of using them, let's say, as a guide. And I'll say, the way I see it is, if you have an emotion, it pops up, it's really strong. And then you immediately feel that there's an action that you should take based on that emotion. You're going to feel that, but then I think it kind of shows that I'm sort of into meditation. But what I think is a lot more effective is to watch the emotion arise, let it arise, watch the type of action that you feel that you should take based on that emotion. Let that intention arise too, and then wait for it to pass away. And then once the emotion is finally passed, you should be able to say, okay, this emotion rose for a reason. What was the reason for that? Well, this happened. Okay, what is the most practical thing to do based on that? What is the most practical solution to do based on these situations that created that emotion? And then you have your answer. But if you just go problem, emotion, action, it's usually going to be something that is not really effective and is not really going to better, you know, get the best outcome for you that would be most effective for you and your community. And so, for example, it goes back to what you're talking about with the boundary setting that a father will do with their children particularly the male children. You're doing that rough and tumble play, and then you get taught about a boundary. So you start to learn that, like, oh, my emotions aren't necessarily telling me what the best action to take. Just because my anger told me that I want to punch my dad in the face, okay, right. I have to learn this process of suppress the emotion, stop, assess what the best action is, and then go with that. So I actually, it's really embarrassing to say, but when I was in high school, I was quite addicted to video games, and I think that the only thing that really saved me from becoming a total loser in my adult life was the fact that my dad had me work his job, at his business for I think it was 2 years, maybe a little longer than that. And so it was really hard work, a lot of manual labor, working. Even when I was on summer break, I was expected to work. Even when I had school, come back from school, sometimes I'd have to work after school. And then I sent him this letter, several years later about how you should have made me feel more involved, or made the job more fun, or tell me what's you shouldn't have made it so hard, something like that. You should have thought more about my emotions and made it fun for me or something. And then after a while, on my own, I just kind of came back and realized, wait, there was some sort of stupid narrative out there that was telling me what he did was wrong, even though it was exactly the thing that I needed. And it is the whole thing that made me, I would say the key thing that made me successful today, if I have any success today, is thanks to that. But I had to take a step and realize there was some sort of narrative playing in the space around me, in the books that I was reading, in the TV shows that I was watching, that, oh, he was wrong because he did not value my emotions. He wasn't paying attention to the fact that, it was so hard for me that I had to work or whatever. And then I came back and, out of my own, just at some point, I saw this video, and it was some Starbucks barista complaining that they had to do an 8-hour shift, and I can't believe it.
I saw that.
I saw that. I laughed, and I was like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. How can someone not tolerated an 8-hour shift. And then something kind of flipped in my head. It's like, well, why are you able to tolerate an 8-hour shift or even a 12-hour shift or like these 16-hour days you put in sometimes to, tweak your little YouTube videos and all that. And I was like, oh shit. Okay. It was thanks to my dad's, masculinity. Maybe some people would say toxic masculinity, which was actually the exact thing that I needed. And so I came back, wrote him a letter. I said like, hey, I was a total idiot. Everything I said was totally wrong. And you basically saved my entire adult work ethic. So, I mean, my point is, it's kind of a hard thing to process because I think nowadays there are some things that it's good to tell men, don't just repress all your emotions and like try and think about why you think this way, analyze your childhood and all that. But then sometimes it can go a little too far to where it's like a too feminine solution to a masculine problem. I guess, are there, sorry about my rant, but are there kind of any other things you see going on there?
It's a good rant, and I totally agree. And like, this is something that me now at 43, my oldest daughter's 22, I've done a little bit of living myself. And I think we should do more talking about the virtues of masculinity, right? So what you just talked about with your father is kind of like this idea that men know that a certain level of adversity in life is necessary for your happiness. And we don't see that with the feminist and especially the field of psychology, which is now 80% female. It's like 80% of psychology degrees are earned by women. The self-help explosion, everything has to be soft and nice. There was a comedian who used to do a bit about this, about how playgrounds 50 years ago were like death traps, and now everything is soft and squishy and close to the ground and really safe. And it's like a symptom of this, like women taking over everything, right? They launched a campaign at the public school near me called Be Nice. And I thought, I know people hear that and they think, yeah, be nice. Why wouldn't you want people to be nice? Of course, be nice. But there's a lot of times where being nice isn't necessarily the best response. There are, we hear a lot of emphasis put on empathy. You have to have empathy. We have to make children more empathetic. There's this feminine idea that the problem with the world today is not enough empathy and not enough focus on everyone's emotions. I would say it's the opposite, right? It's people, if you make everything easy and soft and free of adversity and no harm to anyone and everything's kind, then people don't ever learn how to overcome anything. They don't ever learn how to overcome themselves. Like that's something I actually wish I had more of when I was younger, because I was very smart and school was super easy for me and I didn't get in trouble. So like when I became an adult, I really had to learn to push myself. And it took me, screwing up some things to realize, I should probably work on, having better control over what I'm putting in my mouth and making sure that I'm exercising and making sure that I have I had to do a lot of self-improvement type of stuff that was not helped at all by this feminist, be kind to yourself, mental health awareness, like all this soft psychology that's just everywhere. It was like, no, I'm the kind of person who could have used a little nudge or a little push, and that would have been really beneficial for me. And I think the reason we see two-parent homes with mom and dad being by far the best outcomes for kids is because you have that balance, right? If you fall and skin your knee, your mom's going to kiss it and bandage it, and that's good for kids. We don't want to take that away. But also, there's times where if they've been laying in bed playing video games for a week straight on summer vacation, dad needs to come in and be like, okay, come outside. You're doing some yard work with me, right? You're going to earn your keep around here, and you're going to learn to get out of bed and get off your butt and do some things. And the dads are good at putting down boundaries. Like I said, we have 4 daughters. And there was a period where they were all like between 10 and 20, like most of them were teenage or pre-teenage. And my husband would always say, every day I'm going to make somebody cry. Doesn't matter what I do. Doesn't matter what I say. Someone's going to run off crying for some reason. But now the older ones, they'll call you or they'll text you and they'll be like, oh my gosh, mom, I used to think that you and dad were so mean. Or I used to think I had the weird, strict parents, but I'm so thankful now that I did. Now I'm so glad because I have a good work ethic. I can make good decisions. I know how to take care of myself. I feel more mature than my peers, they now it's, and that's the best thing you could hear as a mom, right? When your kids tell you, hey, you guys did a good job. I know I got mad at you sometimes when I was a teenager, but thanks for doing a good job. That's what I think we should all be striving for. And we need the necessary male element there. Without masculinity, nobody's going to make it. Okay, if you feminize the world, these psychonaut goddess worship gurus who think we need to feminize everything are wrong, and they're going to destroy everything. So we can see that. We can see the trends through all the data we've talked about of where things are going, and that's not where we want to be. And so historically, men have done amazing things. There are so many good, virtuous things about masculinity that we should be talking about. We should be talking about that a lot. So that's part of what I'm trying to do, right? Not that men need me, a housewife, to stick up for them, but it's like I'm trying to talk to my fellow ladies and be like, listen, you say you want him to be soft and emotional and in touch with his feelings and to listen to you. But if the man does do that, you suddenly find that you're not attracted to him anymore. Mm-hmm. And you break up with him and you find a guy who's more masculine, right? Because that's the guy that kind of does it for you. So it's like, women think they want that, but I don't think most women want a soft, feminized man unless they are really into, domineering or something like that. But no, it's a good thing to have polarity. It's a good thing to have masculine virtues and feminine virtues. Both sexes have virtues, and we should focus on those things.
One quick question on that before we wrap up. Do you think there's a kind of innate drive in women to, let's say, test the competency or test the resiliency of a man? So they kind of poke and prod at him at pretty much any stage, in the courting stage, whether they're married, whether they're dating for several years, several months, whatever. They're constantly poking to kind of get a feel for what level of man they are. And then some men interpret that as, okay, she is signaling to me what she wants. She wants me to be more open and caring, or I have to do this. I have to, pick up the socks. And so I will do the things she wants, and then she will like me more because I am helping her get what she wants. But what actually she's trying to do is to see, like, okay, let's see where his boundaries are and how strong they are.
Absolutely, 100%. I like to call that shit testing, right? And all of us women do it. It is kind of built into our mate-seeking patterns. And although it's probably not comfortable for you guys, I think it's somewhat necessary. I've been married 16 years and I still do it occasionally. Although the longer I've been with my husband, that gets more and more established. It doesn't happen as much as it did in the beginning, for sure. But every once in a while, I will do a little shit testing myself. Usually I catch myself, or my husband will kind of be like, what's going on with you? But the thing, I think we should talk about this more, because I think you're right. I think when you're raised by a single mom and all your authority figures have been female, you do hear that signaling that way. And I know a lot of men have told me that, like, well, I did what she wanted. She wanted this, and so I did it. And then she'd demand that, and so I'd cave. And they'd perpetually give in. And what that signals to the woman, whether she consciously realizes it or not, is that, this guy doesn't have a healthy respect for himself. He's going to totally let me get away with murder. And women actually don't find that attractive. I will say one of the things I liked most about my husband that I probably didn't realize until a few years after we were together is he would not put up with any of my shit, but in a kind way. So it would go something like this. I'd be going, me. And he'd go, no. He wouldn't get mad and smack me around. Of course, it wasn't like that. He would just kind of hold the boundary and be like, nope. There was one time early on where I got sassy and like threw a remote control at him. And he was just like, if that is how you're going to behave, I don't want to date you. So I'm going to go home now. And like, you can think about that, if that's what. So he left. And I remember sitting there with my arms crossed being like, ah. And then I went, wait, oh, shoot. I was like, oh, he's right. I don't want to be the crazy girl that throws a remote control. Like, it showed that he had like standards for himself and respect for himself. And he was like, look, I don't have to put up with any abuse from you. Like, if you can't be good to me, I don't have to be with you. And so it's kind of the Mary Poppins rule: be kind, but very firm. I think is a good thing for men. Men do have to have control of their emotions, like you were saying, like they have to be able to process them and not like overreact, because women don't like guys who cry all the time and have a meltdown anytime there's a problem. We're not attracted to that. But we also don't want the kind that punch holes in the drywall, right? So it's like you've got to be able to process your emotions and handle them. And it's a tall order for men. It's something I've grown to really respect about the good men around me, because me as a woman, I think, God, that's got to be hard, always holding the line, always being the person who has to draw the boundary and say no to people when it's necessary. You know, that would be exhausting for me as a woman, to always have to be holding that line and being the person with the boundaries, telling people no, or, you know. So I think that that's something we need. It keeps society from devolving into the pure chaos that we have now. It keeps family life peaceful and from dissolving into chaos. Imagine me with 4 daughters and a husband who could not hold those boundaries. It would have been insane around here. It wouldn't have been good for any of us. So yeah, I think that men who have a healthy respect for themselves, who are good with their masculinity and can control their emotion and hold those boundaries, that's what society needs. That's what families need. That's what women and children need to be safe and protected too.
I mean, it sounds like it's really beneficial for women to have that natural tendency to want to test the men, because if you test him in one way and then you see that he's very emotionally reactive, you know, you put a little thing and say, oh, why you have to be like that? And start flipping out. Then you kind of get an idea that, okay, this person can't control their emotions very well. What's going to happen when I really piss them off? And then they think that they should act on their emotions. Of course, that's an extreme example, and I'm not saying that anyone who gets irritated with, you know, a woman wanting to change the venue like 3 times for their date is going to be an what do you call it? An abusive person. Of course not. But, you know, I'm just saying that there is some utility in it, of course. Like if you try to think about.
Yeah, I think that if right now women are trained to see any boundary a man has as oppression. It's actual conditioning, in my view. From all the research I've done, I think it's actual conditioning to train women to see any healthy boundaries a man has, any healthy respect he has for himself, any natural inclination to control the chaos of the world, to see that as oppression or to see that as abuse, right? That's why every girl on TikTok will tell you that all of her ex-boyfriends are narcissists. It's like, okay, either maybe perhaps it could be you that is the problem here, or maybe these are normal guys who have healthy boundaries and you are interpreting that as narcissism because you're the one with the issue, right? So it's like, I just think that everything has been skewed, and women are so trained to see men as this like threat and this enemy. And that's why I do so much of the research and the writing that I do, to just kind of like illustrate that that's not accurate, and that is like this false thing that we've all been taught, to like look at everything a man does as a potentially abusive transgression. It's kind of crazy.
The other one, of course, is it's insecurity. If they set some, like I have this standard.
Threatened by the strong, independent woman.
Right. It's like, I want a woman who has set up her life so she will prioritize family and prioritize her children. It's like, oh, you're insecure. It's like, wait, what?
I know. I have a good friend who's a podcaster, and he's happily engaged now. He's found a lovely girl, but you know, he would talk about his struggles in dating and looking for a wife, and he would say, I want to have a big family. I want to have a lot of kids. I want to provide really well for my family. I want to take care of my children and my wife. So I want a wife who's interested in raising our children. I don't want a woman who's going to have my children and then send them to some institution to be raised for, 8 or 9 hours out of the day so that she can go have a job. And there were people who would kind of criticize him for that. And I thought, now, what is wrong with a man wanting his children to be raised by their own mother? I mean, it seems like a bare minimum thing to ask for me. And I think it's totally reasonable for men to want a cooperative marriage rather than a competitive one where we're, jockeying for status or talking about, Well, I took out the trash 2 times last week and you only took it out once. So this constant, you ever see this where couples will do this like tally keeping of who's doing what chores and it has to be perfectly equal or the woman's going to have a meltdown. And it's like, I can just tell you from my own experience, life is so much nicer when like the roles are pretty clear. Everyone knows what's expected of them. Everyone can do what kind of comes naturally to them. And the cooperation is really nice. And you have a peaceful home. You have a peaceful marriage where you're free to be a feminine woman around your husband. Oh my gosh, it's such a load off your shoulders. And I've heard this from other women who have kind of chosen a similar life to what I have. You know, they're like, man, it's really nice to not have this pressure of like, I have to be competing and making more money and I have to be a boss girl and I have to prove that I don't need my husband, that he's only here because I want him here, not because I need him here. It's like, ugh, it's just exhausting. Just when both people, when the man can be a man and the woman can be a woman, there is a certain magic that happens. And we've lost that magic in the modern world. And I think it's a major reason for the battle of the sexes and for, you know, failure of marriage and for just people's general unhappiness. Life is pretty good when you cooperate.
Yeah, I see these kind of things like cigarettes. If someone's smoking cigarettes, I have no impulse to tell them that cigarettes is bad for them. They already know. They clearly don't care, but they're going to do it anyway. So if there's someone who's like, I want a marriage where I have a career, my wife has a career, we're going to have kids, we're going to have a babysitter. I know the downstream effects of that. I know how that's going to affect me, how it's going to affect my wife, how it's going to affect my kids. And I have assessed that and I think that is a good path for me. And that's exactly what I want. Then I'm like, oh, cool. Okay. You know, I have no, you know, normally I don't like go up to people and tell them what to do, but I would have no really interest in feeling like that person is making a bad choice because they clearly understand how it works. They're not led by any sort of disillusion, and they said, hey, that's what I want. Or if you have a guy who's like, I know that perhaps my girlfriend or wife might be less attracted to me if I'm like really you know, caught up in my emotions or whatnot, but I feel more free that way and I feel more comfortable and I just feel like it's better. So, you know, I'll kind of take that. I don't really mind. And it's like, oh yeah, cool. You do you, man. Like, do as you want.
Yeah.
But it's when people have these wrong assumptions that it feels like I hope they would, you know, read your book or listen to more content from people like you.
Yeah, that's how I think of it too. I'm like, look, I know that, and people always say, you just want to put women back in the kitchen. And it's not about going back to a time where things were perfect. There is no such thing, right? The 50s weren't perfect. The 1800s weren't perfect. Pre-Enlightenment wasn't perfect. Like I said, it's always about trade-offs. I just think that if we're going to tell women that feminism is a movement that was created by them and for them, and I've been told this so many times, you owe everything you have to like the strong independent women who came before you. Couldn't even write a book if it wasn't for feminism. Well, I take plenty of time in the book to detail that yes, women were writing books long before feminism. Those things were not prohibited. It's not like how you think, right? So I really just want people to have the actual information, the information that's been actually removed from textbooks, actually removed from history books, that they have something other than this abhorrent propaganda that just forces one worldview on them. And that if you don't hold that view, you are socially shamed to death. Because I have a whole folder on my phone of hate mail that I do keep just because some of it's actually quite funny. But, you know, I get tons of hate mail. I get lots of pushback. There's a lot of women that disagree with me and think I'm trying to take their rights. I'm trying to force them into the kitchen. And it's not about that at all. Like I said, I really want to just make choosing motherhood and choosing, you know, peaceful, cooperative coexistence with men a viable option again. I want it to be like an acceptable choice to make. And I want women to have the full story. You know, there's women that write me all the time and they're like, I had no idea about any of the stuff that's in your book. I couldn't believe it. I am shocked. I've gotten sad emails from ladies in their 60s who have, you know, they message me and they say, I'm listening to your audiobook right now and I'm crying because I fell for all of this. I fell for it. And now I'm too old and I can't go back and change it. And I have huge regrets. And when I get, I mean, all the hate mail I get doesn't matter to me when I get those emails from women, because I'm like, no, they deserve to at least have the full truth. They deserve to know all of this information, not just the propaganda. They deserve to actually, feminism is supposed to be about choice, remember? It's supposed to be about giving women choices. So let's give them choices. Let's present the actual history. Let's present all of the facts and let them decide what they want to do, right? That's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to force anyone back in time or into a kitchen. So that's all I'm trying to do.
It's make mothers and men cool again.
Yeah. Make motherhood great again for sure, and make masculinity great again. Yeah, I mean, it's not that complicated, and what I really want is just for women to be able to have that dream of motherhood that most of us have when we're little girls pushing a baby doll in a stroller before society beat that maternal drive out of us and told us that it was bad and unacceptable. I think that's a horrible thing to do to women. And so really, I care about women, I care about men, and I certainly care about children being raised in the best possible environments. So public schools, daycares, and single parent homes are not what the data shows to be best for kids. So yeah, I mean, give people the information. And if everyone thinks I'm crazy and nobody wants to listen, fair enough. But so far, I've been thrilled with the impact, and I've been thrilled with the feedback that I've had. And if I can imagine if I could keep 1,000 marriages together with this information, and that's 1,000 families that raise their children in intact homes with both mom and dad, and their mom is home raising them, not the state paid for daycare or the state public school system, but their mother. And then those 1,000 families will raise their children, hopefully in a similar manner too. It could have this big ripple effect. And I thought, if only a handful of people read the book and think, you know what? Yeah, I feel more justified in staying home with my kids now. I feel like it's a total win, and it was worth all the effort. I did 2.5 years of research for writing this book. So it was a lot of work, but it's been great. And I do get that feedback on my YouTube channel. There's comments from women going, I love watching your streams because sometimes I feel like I'm doing something wrong, or I wonder if I'm making the right choice. And then I listen to your stuff and I feel so good again about being a mom. And I feel like, yeah, I do have the right to, if I want to dedicate my life to motherhood, like I should be able to do that too.
I think that's a great note to end on. Why don't you go ahead and tell us your socials one more time and the title of your book and where people can get it?
Sure. The book is Occult Feminism, The Secret History of Women's Liberation. It's on Amazon. If you're somewhere that you don't have Amazon, you can email me or find me on social media and I'll try to get you a copy. I have a YouTube channel. It's just Rachel Wilson. And you can find my writing on Substack at rwilson.substack.com.
Great. Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been great.